And generational trauma is a very big subject that plays out at the individual level. We are affected by the things that happen to our parents and our grandparents, and it plays out at the cultural level. If you look at, a tremendous amount of research has been done in Canada first about children of Holocaust survivors and high incidences of depression and anxiety. If you look at descendants of Native Americans who were really slaughtered, if you look at descendants of American enslaved people, these things all have cultural, generational repercussions. That's what I wanted to get at. I knew my mother's best friend was murdered. I knew it had an effect on her, and I knew it had an effect on me.
By one estimate, in around the year 1800, so just a few years before Lincoln is born, 3/4 of the world's population was living in bondage of some kind. They were slaves or serfs or indentured servants or forced concubines. 3/4 of the world's population. Freedom was a very rare and precious thing throughout history. And the world had been waiting for centuries for a country like the United States to come along. A whole country conceived of liberty, founded on the idea that people should be free. It never happened before in history, it never happened. And the eyes of the world were on this country, watching, waiting to see if this radical experiment in freedom could possibly work. Because remember, throughout history, the assumption had been that people were not fit to rule themselves. They needed rulers of some kind. And Lincoln, Lincoln also knows that in 1858, the country is still very young. It's less than 100 years old. And that this grand American experiment in freedom and democracy and self-rule is still unproven. And it's beginning to be tested in a hard way, because the cords that have been holding the country together are beginning to stretch and pull apart over the issue of slavery. And Lincoln hates slavery because he knows that in robbing people of their freedom, slavery robs them of any chance to really guide their own destiny and rise in the world and make a better life for themselves. This is what Lincoln was able to do out on the frontier.
Generally what I write about is just stuff that's in my head that has sort of tickled me over some period of time. I collect things in my mind that I think are funny or interesting or just sort of stay with me, and they will rattle around in there and drive me crazy until I open up my laptop and write something. So Nora Goes Off Script is basically a confluence of things that have tickled me over some period of time, and it all wound up in a novel. Nora Goes Off Script is about a made-for-TV romance writer who writes a more serious screenplay about her divorce and ends up falling in love with the man who plays her husband in the movie. That's basically the story. A bunch of other stuff happens. But it's important to know that I wrote this book during the initial quarantine, like Deborah did, of 2020. And as you guys all remember about that time, there wasn't a total certainty that we were a going concern as a people. I wasn't entirely sure that we were going to survive. And I thought, everybody else is watching Netflix, I'm going to sit down and just write this book. And I was waking up earlier and earlier and earlier every day as I got into this book to go check on Nora and Leo and to see what was happening between them. And I can honestly tell you that writing this book is the most fun that I've ever had in my entire life.